interesting as possible, but it's kind of boring because it's a lot of regulations. And there's a lot of memorization with radiation safety. So the things that you have to memorize, I always recommend that students keep what I call a memorization card and just write down those things, kind of like package limits and occupational dose limits. And then the last thing you do before you go take the test is look at that memorization card and make sure you know all those. And then after you pass the test, then you can forget them.
Okay.
All right, here we go. So these are the key topics we're going to talk about. We're going to start with the regulations. So there's really 3 regulations that could possibly be on the board exam. And that's Part 19, Part 20, and Part 35. So Part 19, I don't think will be on the board exam. The only thing that is on here is like the notice to workers, inspections and investigations. That's part of 19. But besides that, 19 doesn't have a whole lot in it that refers to us. The 2 big ones are Part 20 and Part 35. So if you get a question that has anything about radiation protection, it's probably Part 20. And if you get a question that's about the radioactive materials license, that's going to be Part 35, because Part 35 covers everything it has to do with the radioactive materials license. And in fact, when a department first opens and they have to get a radioactive materials license, this is the license that the hospital gets with the NRC. They have to fill out an application, and the application is actually in Part 35. And Part 35 tells you all the things. It says, this is what the training experience of the RSO is. This is the radiation safety program. This is what the RSO has to do. All the authorized user. It just lists everything that you have to do. And so that's the radioactive materials license itself. Now, who's listed on the license by name? All of your authorized users. These are the physicians that authorize you to give radioactive materials. So it's going to say the physician's name. It's going to say what type of material they can use and how much they can use. And so when you're in the department tomorrow, this should be posted on the wall, and you should be able to see all the physicians that are listed, what they can use and how much they can use. The radiation safety officer is also going to be listed on the license by name, as well as their contact information. So you should be able to, at any time you're working in that department, if you want to contact the RSO, that should be posted right in the department. The pharmacist and the physicist, that just depends on the type of license you have. So the pharmacists are all going to be on the pharmacy license if it's a commercialized pharmacy. There's some academic institutions like Vanderbilt and Northwestern and a couple others that have pharmacies in their hospitals. And so they'll have those pharmacists listed on their license. And the physicists really refer to the ones that are working in radiation oncology, and they're doing like the dose estimates and that kind of thing. Supervised user. Who's the supervised user?
The tech.
Exactly. Yeah, that's us. So we're not listed on the license by name. We're referred to as the supervised user, but we're not listed by name. The radiation protection program, that's actually the same as the application for the radioactive materials license. So those 2 things are the same thing. And so what this is basically an outline that says everything you're going to do. It's like, okay, here's how I'm going to check in a package. Here's how I'm going to do leak testing. Here's how I'm going to handle spills. You list everything you're going to do. And that is your radiation protection program. You submit that as your license for your radioactive materials license. And the NRC basically says yes or no. Or they say, okay, this is fine, but you need to adjust this. You have to review it once a year. And if there's any changes, you have to tell the NRC you're going to make a change before you make the change. So maybe you decide you're going to, change your dose ranges. Like we don't want to do plus or minus 20% anymore. We want to do plus or minus 10%. Before you make that change, you have to tell the NRC. All right, signs. Which sign is always going to be posted in the nuclear medicine department?
Material.
Radioactive materials, yes. This one will always be posted in our department. When will you see radiation area posted in our department?
It's over 15 milligrams per hour.
Okay, so it's actually more than 5 milligram per in 1 hour, 30 centimeters from the source. So this is not a dose rate. It's not 5 milligram per hour. It's if you're going to receive 5 milligram total in 1 hour. So it could be a higher dose rate, but you might not be there as long. So this is going to be posted if we have CT in our department. So if we have a PET CT or SPECT CT, we also need this one. Now, the high radiation, you're going to see this in radiation oncology. You're not going to see these in our department because this is more than 100 milligram in 1 hour at 30 centimeters. That's a high dose. Okay, so you're not going to see that in our departments. We'll have caution radioactive materials and caution radiation area. Now, this is more than 100. So if your question says it's 75 milligram in 1 hour, 75 is still going to be radiation area because this is more than 5, but less than 100. All right, dose calibrator. Are you required to have a dose calibrator?
Yes.
You're actually not, believe it or not. You're not required to. So if you get all of your doses from a radiopharmacy and you do not manipulate, you do not change anything, you don't change the needle, you don't change anything, you do not have to have a dose calibrator. You can decay correct it. Okay, so that means that if you get a dose of 5 millicuries of mebrofenin that's calibrated for 10 a.m. and you inject it at 11 a.m., you don't have to put it in a dose calibrator, but you have to calculate what the dose was that you gave to the patient through decay. Now that has to be in your radioactive materials license. So most licenses aren't written like that. I used to actually write radioactive materials licenses, and when I did, I would write that we were going to use direct measurement. We're going to use the dose calibrator to measure all our doses unless it failed QC. If it failed QC, then we were going to decay correct. That prevented the department from closing down just because it failed a constancy. All right, if you make your own kits, then you have to have a dose calibrator because the dose has to be put in the dose calibrator by somebody. And so it does have to go in the dose calibrator. All right, can you add 2 doses together for your patient? Yep, yes, you can. You can add 2 doses together. Yep. So let's say you've got maybe you have 2 resting doses and they've decayed and you want to do a resting on your patient, you could actually give them both of those doses. Can you split 1 dose for 2 patients? No, you can't do that because that's actually Medicare fraud because that is you're buying 1 dose and you're charging 2 patients for it. So years ago, there were departments that were doing this because they were getting charged the same amount for a 10 millicurie cestamide as a 30 millicurie cestamide. So they were ordering 30 millicuries of cestamide and giving 3 resting doses to different patients. They got in big trouble. All right, nationally recognized standards. So the NRC no longer is very prescriptive about how we do our quality control. They basically said it has to be according to nationally recognized standards. We have to know what the nationally recognized standards are. So with our quality control, and we talked about this when we did instrumentation, linearity is done quarterly, accuracy is done annually, constancy is done daily, and geometry is done when we change the size or the shape or the volume of our syringes. All right, record retention. If you forget, just guess 3, okay? Because almost all of them are 3. How long you have to keep your audits, your survey instruments, leak tests, all of these are 3 years. The exceptions, 5 years, anything that has to do with changing your radiation protection program. If you change your RSO, if you change what you're doing with your radiation safety committee, if you send in an amendment, anything that has to do with your radiation protection program, you keep for 5 years. Indefinitely, this is your worker exposure records. So if I went back to my very first hospital I ever worked at, they're not going to have my exposure records because they don't have nuclear medicine anymore. So that's license termination. But the second hospital I worked at, they still have nuclear medicine. If I walked in there, they should still have my worker exposure records. I should test them. I should walk in and see if they do. It's like, I'm just testing to see. All right, radiation safety education. This is one of the most common places that we get violations from the NRC. And what radiation safety education is, it has to be specific to your license. Okay, what that means is you can't just go off and get, an hour of radiation safety education. Like right now you're getting radiation safety education, but that doesn't count because I don't know how you check in a package. I don't know what your radioactive materials license says about cleaning up spills. So it has to be like, okay, in this department, here's how we do the things. It's kind of like every year you have to have like fire safety and, computer safety and that kind of stuff. Radiation safety has to be done by your hospital specifically for you. Now, this could simply be one of the technologists compiling this and doing it and documenting it. It doesn't have to be like all official, but it does have to be documented. And any workers that are likely to receive over 100 milligram. So just because they work in your department doesn't necessarily mean that they have to have radiation safety education. If they work in the department, but they're just doing administrative tasks and they're not exposed to patients, they don't need radiation safety education. You're also supposed to get it before starting work. And if you're a student, you're supposed to get it before starting clinic, but I know a lot of times that doesn't happen. So, of course, nuclear medicine technologists are going to get it. And then anybody that's going to be in our department when we're not there. So it being a restricted area means that there shouldn't be anybody in our department when we're not there. But we know that sometimes there are. Environmental services come in sometimes at night and clean, maintenance, and security. So they have to get radiation safety education as well. Their education is going to be different. Their education is going to be basically like, okay, if you see this is a radiation symbol and you don't touch that. That's, if you see this in the trash, then don't take out the trash. That's what their radiation safety education is going to be. All right, declaration of pregnancy. So declaration of pregnancy is voluntary. This reg guide gives you more information about it if you want to read up on it. But if you declare your pregnancy, first it has to be in writing. So you can't just go to the RSO and say, hey, I'm pregnant. You have to actually sign something that says you're pregnant. And then you'll be issued a fetal monitor. The fetal monitor is just another whole body badge, but it's worn at the abdomen. And you're allowed 500 milligrams. Well, the fetal dose is allowed 500 milligrams. And that's a common misconception too, because the fetal dose is worn at the abdomen. Your whole body dose is worn at the collar. They're usually going to be the exact same dose, but if your dose is higher, you don't count that toward the fetal dose. The fetal dose is the one that's just for the fetus. Restrictions, the NRC does not have like, oh, these are restrictions for if you're pregnant. The NRC just basically says, if you declare pregnancy, restrictions are between you and your RSO and less than 500 milligrams. So if you don't like the restrictions, maybe your RSO is not very smart and says, oh, well, you're pregnant, so you can't work in the department. You need to go and work in this other department. You're like, I don't want to do that. I want to do nuclear medicine. You can undeclare your pregnancy, even if you are pregnant. You are allowed to do that. All right, audits. This is where you look at your radiation protection program once a year. And I always think it's a good idea for technologists to do their own audits, because then you can find out what you're doing, what you're not doing. And it also makes you familiar with what's in your radiation protection program. So sometimes a physicist does this, sometimes the RSO does this. And I also recommend it's every 6 months. That way, if you forget, you don't miss it, but it is required annually. And it's basically taking your radiation protection program and then going and seeing if all your documentation matches it. And sometimes it's like going up to a technologist and saying, okay, your radiation protection program says that you're going to check this GM meter to see if it's working. How do you do that? And then you see if the technologist can do that. So it's really making sure the technologists know what's in their radiation protection program and that they're following that. Okay, how do we make an area restricted versus unrestricted?
Unrestricted usually is the waiting room, and the restricted is past the nuclear medicine department.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And what do we physically do to make it a restricted area?
Putting a sign in the waiting area.
Yeah, we put a sign up. We put a sign up in our departments that say caution radioactive materials. And as soon as we put that sign up, it becomes a restricted area. And the restriction is just notifying that, hey, you're in this area, you're going to get radiation. So the amounts that people can get are going to be different. In an unrestricted area, we have to make sure that the public in an unrestricted area gets no more than 2 milligram in any hour. And that's not 2 milligram per hour. It's 2 milligram in 1 hour. So that means we can have something that has a higher dose rate, as long as we're not exposing them for the amount of time that it would take for them to get a total of 2 milligrams, then we're okay. So 2 milligrams in 1 hour or 100 milligram in a year. Now, how would we know that? Well, let's say you have a hot lab, and in your hot lab, you have some sources, and those sources are right against the wall. And on the other side of the wall is a public hallway. If people are walking down that public hallway and it's, they're only there for a couple minutes, then you calculate what is the dose rate coming from this wall and how long will somebody possibly be there in a year. And then you calculate that. So not a big deal. But if on the other side of that wall was where the line to Starbucks is, now they might be there for a while, or they might be repeat customers that are there every morning for, 15 minutes. So then you have to ensure that that occupancy factor is below where they'll receive 100 milligrams. Now, if it is over 100 milligrams, what do? Either shield it or distance, move the source somewhere else so they aren't getting that. Ultimately, it does not include the contribution from patients. So once you inject the patient with radiation, you're not responsible for them irradiating other people. Unless it's a therapy, then you're a little bit responsible. But this doesn't count from contribution from patients. All right, what is a leak test?
It's a wipe test.
Okay, and what are we wipe testing?
In case of leaking source.
Okay, so it's the sealed sources, right? Like the cobalt sheet source. We might have some sources that we use for our dose calibrator testing. We're going to leak test them every 6 months. It used to be every 3 months, but now it's every 6 months. And the total amount of removable contamination is 0.005 microcuries. This is what it says in the regs, 0.005 microcuries. But the problem is when we do this, we do it in a well counter. And so we count it, we get counts per minute. How do you go from counts per minute to microcuries?
To EMP.
So we'll divide it by the efficiency first to get disintegrations per minute. And then from disintegrations per minute, we can convert that to microcuries. And so this number actually comes out to 11,100 disintegrations per minute. Okay, so how do we do this? Have you ever done a leak test?
No, I did a wipe test.
Okay. Yeah, most technologists have not done a leak test. Usually the physicist comes in and does it. It's like every 6 months and they just come in and do it. So all it is a wipe test. You use some gauze, you wipe it, you count it per minute, you get your background, convert it to DPM. From DPM, you convert to microcuries. If it's less than 0.005, it passes. And we don't have to leak test all of our sources. Okay, so if the half-life is less than 30 days, we don't have to leak test it. So any short-lived sealed sources, which I'm having trouble figuring out why we would have a short-lived sealed source, but if it's gaseous material like xenon, a xenon vial, you don't leak test that. 100 microcuries or less. So sometimes we have like these little 50 microcurie cobalt 57, those little button sources that we use for positioning. You don't have to leak test that because it's less than 100 microcuries. And then anything that's in storage. Now, if we put something in storage, what is the maximum half-life for storage?
120 days.
Very good. Yes, you've been studying 120 days. So that means that that cobalt sheet source that has a 271-day half-life cannot put that in storage. So if it is in storage, though, with less than 120-day half-life, it doesn't matter the amount. You don't have to leak test it. Okay. All right. What if the leak test fails? Then what?
They have to take it out.
First, you're going to do it again. Make sure it actually failed. All right. So you've done it a second time. It failed. You're going to take it out of service. What else do you have to do?
Notify the RSO.
Notify the RSO. You have to notify somebody else too.
The supervisor.
Okay. Who else? Somebody really official.
The nuclear pharmacy.
Yeah. No, even more official than that. You have to notify the NRC.
Oh,
You have to notify the NRC when your leak test fails. And then you have to assume that it's been leaking since the last time you did the leak test, which was 6 months ago. So that's a long time. So you have to go and decontaminate the department. You have to make sure that anybody that has used that sealed source is not contaminated. And when you take it out of service, now if your department depends on that sealed source, for example, maybe it's your cobalt sheet source, now you can't even scan patients because you no longer have a cobalt sheet source. So you have to do all of those things. And then you have to transfer it back to an authorized recipient. All right, sealed source inventory. You're going to do this, usually you do it at the same time. Again, it's every 6 months, it used to be quarterly. So all we're going to do here is we're going to identify what the source is, cobalt 57 sheet source. Where is it located? In the closet, in the lead lining. How much is there? 8 millicuries, and then sign your name. So it's like an inventory that you would do in a department store. It's like, what do you have? Where is it? And how many do you have? You're gonna do the same thing. Where are your sources? What are they? And how much is there? How many millicuries or microcuries are there? Okay, when we dispose of our waste, we can dispose it 4 different ways. We can decay it in storage, transfer to an authorized recipient, sewer, discharge, or release it into the atmosphere. You already said this, when you decay it in storage, less than 120-day half-life. Now, do you have to keep it until background, or do you have to keep it 10 half-lives?
whichever comes first.
No.
Oh, the source, how much the half-life of the times 10?
Okay, so the old rules were you had to keep it 10 half-lives. Now you just keep it to background. It used to be 10 half-lives and background. All right, 10 half-lives was going to get you to the background anyways, but now it's just to background. They used to come in and when they would inspect our departments, they would come in and they'd look at the date you put it into storage and the date you disposed of it, and they would calculate 10 half-lives and make sure that you kept it for 10 half-lives. And that was just ridiculous. There's no reason to do that. As long as there isn't any radioactivity left, you can just get rid of it. So we just keep it to background now. Why will you keep long-lived and short-lived isotopes separately?
Because they decay, take so long to decay for the long
Yeah. Yeah. So the long-lived ones you have to keep longer. And so if you mix them up, now you have to keep your waste longer instead of just keeping the long-lived ones. You have to remove the radiation symbol. So don't ever throw away a radiation symbol. And these are all the things that you have to document. All right, returning to an authorized user. Do you ever return any unused doses to the pharmacy?
No.
Okay, sometimes we do. Sometimes we have a contract with the pharmacy that if our patient doesn't show up, they'll give us credit for 2 doses a month or something. So we have to send them back. Yeah. And when we do that, we put them in our boxes and then we send them back the next day. Okay. And by the time the next day comes, they have decayed enough that they're below limited quantities. But we usually can't send them back the same day because it's too much radioactivity. So we'll talk about limited quantities when we get to that slide. The other way we can get rid of it is there's a commercial waste handlers. There are companies that will take radioactive waste, but they're very expensive. Okay. When you get your cobalt 57 sheet source, do you guys use a cobalt 57 sheet source?
Yes.
Okay.
For the lymphangial, the breast and lymph.
Okay, you use it for like lymphoscintigraphy?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So when you get a cobalt sheet source, what happens is you also buy a return kit at the same time. So many times they won't even sell you the sheet source unless you buy a kit to send it back, because otherwise, you're stuck with this thing and you can't get rid of it. So it can be expensive. All right, you can get rid of it in the sewer. So we used to do this years ago. We did a lot of bad things years ago we don't do now. So if our dose was too hot, we would just squirt a little bit in the sink and we would run the water behind it. We don't do that anymore. According to the NRC, you can though, as long as you calculate this wastewater discharge rate and you calculate how much activity you're putting down the sewer, but nobody does that. And so just know that the NRC says you can as long as you do that calculation and it's dilute enough that it is below the levels. Urine and feces are exempt, okay? So we're not storing any urine or feces. All of that can, again, once it's in the patient, we're no longer really responsible for it, and so that can go down the sewer. Atmosphere, you can release into the atmosphere below what are limited quantities. And again, I'm going to talk to you about limited quantities in a minute. There's limited quantities and then there's exempt quantities. Exempt quantities are what are exempt from the regulations, which there's a whole list of radionuclides, and it says if it's below this amount, we don't care. All right, that's not going to be in the regulations. And by the way, 10 microcuries of cesium is an exempt quantity. So if you wanted to buy 10 microcuries of cesium-137, you could. Anyways, that is exempt quantity. Limited quantity is the amount that you send back in an accepted package. When you flip the cards and you send the package back, that's a limited quantity. And so all the limited quantities, there's a list of them. And if it is a gas, you can release that gas into the atmosphere as long as it's below that limited quantity. And with xenon, it's 54.1 millicuries. All right, wipes and surveys. How often do you do wipes and surveys?
Every day.
Are you required to do them every day?
You're supposed to.
Nope. So whatever's in your radioactive materials license, you have to. The NRC says you have to do wipes and surveys on a reasonable schedule. So when you make your radiation protection program, you put in there, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do ambient dose rate surveys. These are our GM meter surveys. We're going to do ambient dose rate surveys once a week. And if the NRC is like, okay, that's fine, then you only have to do them once a week. And removable contamination surveys, those are your wipes. You might say, we're only going to do these once a month. If the NRC says, okay, that's what you do once a month. The old requirements, and when I say old, this is before 2002. The old requirements were daily surveys, weekly wipes. It was easy to remember. And a lot of states and a lot of departments have held on to that, which is fine. And if you're a busy department anyways, you need to do these daily surveys, weekly wipes. So what is the reason we do surveys and wipes?
In case of contamination.
Okay. Okay. So we're looking for contamination, but the reason we're looking for contamination is not just to find it and clean it up, because if that were the case, we would have to do them at the end of every day to make sure that we're not leaving any contamination. But the real reason that we do these is to identify our practice. We identify, okay, which areas are we contaminating so we can prevent contamination in the future. So that's why the schedule that we do these is a reasonable schedule. All right, we have to evaluate our hands and feet before we leave the department to make sure we don't take any contamination with us. This 10% requirement, that's where we're going to do our wipes and surveys. And that means anywhere where somebody's likely to receive 10% of the annual amount, you have to do wipes and surveys. All right, what about therapy? How often do you have to do wipes and surveys when you do a therapy?
Is that the same with the bioassay? Or the
So bioassay is what we're going to do on us, yeah, when you do a therapy. But a therapy, talking about wipes and surveys. So if I do a therapy Monday morning, when do I have to do a wipe and a survey?
That's daily.
At the end of the day. Yep. So therapy is the exception. If you're doing a therapy, you have to do a wipe and survey at the end of the day. If you're not doing therapy, then it's whatever schedule is in your radiation protection program. All right, you need to have a map of the area showing where you're doing the wipes and surveys. So a map can look something like this. It's probably going to be more detailed than that. It'll probably show, you know, where the treadmill is, and it'll show in the hot lab where the dose calibrator is and that kind of stuff. And those records you have to keep for 3 years. All right, these are suggested trigger levels. So these are the things you want to memorize. This goes on your memorization card. So restricted and unrestricted areas, and those are separated by whether there's a sign or not. It's going to be different for surveys, okay? If it's restricted, we can have a higher radiation rate because people are notified. They're like, hey, there's radiation in this area, up to 5 MR per hour. If it's unrestricted, now we haven't notified people that they're going to have radiation. And so we have to make sure it's less than that. But we also need to make sure it's also less than 2 total millirem in 1 hour. Okay. So this is the rate. This is the total dose in 1 hour. All right. 2200 DPM per 100 centimeters square. So when you wipe an area, you wipe 100 centimeters square. When you wipe a box, you wipe 300 centimeters square. So when you're wiping an area, you only wipe 100 centimeters square, and this is the trigger level. All right. And if you have that math book that says 22,000, know that that math book is wrong. All right. Have you ever had a minor spill?
I saw somebody had a spill. No.
Okay. So you've never dropped a drop of technetium? Or maybe the patient's gauze fell after you. My point is that we have minor spills all the time. And we really don't classify them as minor spills, but anytime you drop a drop of technetium, that's going to be a minor spill. And sometimes that just happens, you know, the needle leaks or the syringe leaks, or, you know, something has just happened that caused it to leak. So minor spills, how we react to them is kind of common sense. We're going to notify people in the area. They're like, hey, Wing, I just dropped some technetium here. And we're going to prevent the spread. I'll just put some gauze on top of it to prevent it from spreading. I'm going to clean it up. All right. I'm going to wear gloves. I'm going to survey the area after I clean it up and make sure it's below those trigger levels. I'm going to check around the spill because maybe I spilled somewhere else and I didn't realize it. Check hands, clothing, and shoes. And then this is the one that we forget to do, is report it to the RSO. Okay. Major spills. What would be an example of a major spill?
Drop the radiopharmaceutical on the floor. Drop.
How much and what type of a radiopharmaceutical?
I would say therapy.
Yeah. Therapies are always going to be major spills. And then and usually like 100 millicuries or more of a diagnostic dose will be a major spill. And it also, the NRC doesn't basically say, okay, this is a major spill and this is a minor spill. You know, it also involves whether or not personnel has gotten contaminated. So if you contaminate yourself with, you know, maybe F-18, that could be a major spill because that's you know, a high energy gamma ray that you're being exposed to. So what are we going to do? We're going to clear the area, notify people to get out. We just basically, when a major spill happens, our number one priority is to prevent people from being contaminated. So it's like you get everybody out. And then ultimately, you notify the RSO who will come in and assist you in cleaning this up. So we had a major spill one time. We were giving a capsule to a special needs child, an I-131 capsule. And on his way out, he vomited that entire capsule, and not just a little, just a lot, in a public hallway. And so we had to shut down that public hallway, reroute traffic. So foot traffic had to be rerouted through the hospital and just basically wait for that thing to decay. So it was awful. But that would be a major spill. Anything therapy. Okay, required postings. NRC Form 3. Have you seen this in your department?
I don't know.
It should be in your department somewhere. Okay. This is the NRC one. There's also, each state will have their own, but basically it looks the same way. And this is required to be posted in your department. So when you go to department tomorrow, see if you can find this, and also see if you can find the radioactive materials license. Take a look at both of those because that's going to help reinforce what we're talking about. But what this is this is basically saying, hey, employee, you're going to be exposed to radiation working in this department. So I have certain responsibilities to you. I'm going to give you all the things that you need, syringe shields and everything. And you have responsibilities to me to ensure that you respect radiation and you use it appropriately. So it's basically just a notification between you and the employer that you're both aware you're getting radiation and you're both doing what you have to do to keep you both safe. So that's Form 3. What's Form 4? All right, so Form 4, this has to do with your cumulative dose. This is if you were exposed to, if you worked at one hospital at the beginning of the year, and then at the end of the year, you start working at another hospital, right? So, Wing, are you still in school or have you graduated?
I'm done with school, but not graduated.
Okay, okay. So, like when you finish your clinicals and you have your dose record, so when you go get that first job, you're supposed to get this Form 4 filled out by your school, basically saying how much radiation you got. So then when you get the job, they're like, oh, okay, so you had 120 millirem for the first 6 months of the year. Now you can still get 5,000 minus 120 because 5,000 is the maximum. If you don't get this form filled out, then your employer is going to assume you got 2,500, which is the maximum amount you're allowed in 6 months. So that's half of the amount. So Form 4 is about how much radiation did you get at another facility before you came to this facility. And then Form 5. What is this form?
This is from your DBE or TEDE form.
Yeah, so this Form 5 is your annual occupational reporting form. So once a year, you should get this. So if you just finished school in January or February of next year, they should send you one of these forms. And it should tell you the total amount of radiation you got in all the different categories. So deep dose equivalent, lens of the eye, shallow dose, committed dose, and total dose. So your employer is actually only required to tell you about your dose once per year. And they do that with Form 5. States will have their own forms, but that's required. So back to required postings. Form 3 is required. So see if you can find that when you go back to work. You also have to post the license. So see if you can find that as well. The application, it either has to be posted, but sometimes the applications are 100 pages long, so we're not going to post 100 pages. So you can post where the location is. And, if you're working at that hospital, I would want to see that because that's your radiation protection program. And sometimes we go into hospitals and we ask the techs that work there, why are we doing it this way? Well, that's how we've always done it. And sometimes practice changes just a little bit over time. It's a good idea to take a look at that and just find out if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. Any operating procedures, so like how you handle a spill, that should be posted. How you check in a package, that should be posted. And then this is a weird one. So if you do get like a violation at an inspection, you're supposed to post that violation, but you only have to post it for like 3 days. And they only come and inspect you every 3 years. So it's kind of weird. Okay. All right. So the NRC only requires you to be told once a year what your exposure is. It's a good practice to tell you monthly or quarterly, but only required once a year. Badges can be exchanged either 1 month, every 2 months, or every 3 months. When you were in school, how often did you exchange your badges?
Every 3 months.
Every 3 months. Yeah. A lot of schools are going to every 3 months because it's more economical. And students tend to not get as much radiation as technologists. All right. The RSO should evaluate quarterly because quarterly are ALERA levels. So what's ALERA level 1?
It's a 10% quarterly fraction of the legal dose limit.
Yeah. So if the annual amount is 5,000, you get the quarterly amount, I'm going to divide that by 4. So that's going to be 1,250. And then 10% of that, I just moved the decimal point over, so it's 125. And then what's ALERA 2?
30.
30%, so it'd be 375. Okay. So what happens if you exceed a layer 1 for the quarter?
You have to talk to the RSO to find out what we're doing wrong.
Okay. Is action required? Do they have to do something?
Mm, yes.
Nope. Actions required with a layer 2, but not a layer 1. So I was working at a hospital years ago when I first started, and I was exceeding a layer 1 almost every quarter. And then once or twice a year, I was exceeding a layer 2. And we had a state inspection because we were an agreement state, and the state came in and they were like, okay, what action was taken when you exceeded a layer 2? I'm like, what are you talking about? So we kind of got in a little bit of trouble. And they were like, no, when you exceed a layer 2, your employer is responsible for taking action. And so they actually increased the size of our department. So our processing station wasn't right next to the camera, because that's where I was getting all my dose. I was sitting there processing. And this was back when, it took 15 minutes to process an MPI study. Now you just hit a button and it does it. So I was sitting there all day scanning patients, getting irradiated. Once we increased the size of the department and my desk was moved, I never exceeded a layer 1 again. So it made a huge difference. All right. Who gets badged? What's this 10% rule?
The yearly exposure rate.
Okay. So anyone that's likely to get 10% of the annual exposure needs to wear a badge. Okay. And so how do you find out? So maybe you have a new stress tech in the department. She's like, everybody's wearing a badge. I want to wear a badge. Well, give them a badge for 3 months, see what their readings are. If it's 10%, then they need to wear a badge. If it's less than 10%, then they're fine. All right, packages, type A, type B, and accepted. Type A is what our doses come in. Type B, you're never going to see, and accepted, that's how we return our packages. Now, type A, sometimes we used to call them ammo boxes. This is what they look like, because they used to actually be boxes from the war when the soldiers would carry the ammunition, and so we called them ammo boxes. Now our boxes look more like this. They're more commercial, and it says type A right there on it. This is a box that has a generator in it. So a generator also goes into type A, but notice it's a yellow 3. Okay, so type A packages can be white 1, yellow 2, or yellow 3. Type B packages look like this. All right, so we're not going to ever see a type B package because this is way more of shielding than we need. And then accepted packages, this is when we return the package and we flip the card. What's another name for an accepted package?
I'm sorry.
Another name for accepted package.
UN 2910.
Very good. Yes, UN 2910. All right, so these are the 3 labels. Labels are based on transport index in the survey. This box here is where the transport index goes, and notice there's no box on white 1 because there's no transport index on white 1. So if somebody asked you, how do you define the transport index? What is that? What is that? What does it mean?
T1 is type 2, yellow 2, and then anything over 1 in TI in 1 is type 3.
Okay. And how do you determine what the transport index is?
Anything over 50 gram.
Okay, so we're going to measure the box at 1 meter. Okay, so the transport index is measuring it at 1 meter. And the assumption is whoever is transporting that box, the box in their car is 1 meter away from them. So the transport index tells us how much radiation the person transporting it is getting. That's why it's called the transport index. And that's why with white 1, there's no transport index. So whoever's transporting a white 1 shouldn't get any radiation at all. Yellow 2 is less than 1, yellow 3 is greater than 1. Now, the maximum transport index is 10. If it's over 10, then it needs more shielding, okay? Because you can't expect the person transporting it to be getting 10 MR per hour. That's too much radiation. All right. Labels are on 2 sides, except for yellow 3. You have to put 3 labels on, which is kind of interesting because I didn't even know that until about 2 years ago. All right. So this goes on your memorization card. Make sure you know that. Limits. If you get a box that's over 200 MR per hour at surface or over 10 MR transport index, or if your box has more than 2200 DPM per 100 centimeter square, you can't accept the package. And so this happened to me one time. We ordered a diagnostic dose. Literally everything's happened to me. We ordered a diagnostic dose of I-131. It was like 12 microcuries, okay? And they gave us a therapeutic dose of like 10 millicuries, and it wasn't shielded. And so we had 10 millicuries of I-131 in our department without shielding. So I came into work that day and my coworker was like, don't go into the hot lab. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's like, I've already called the state. We have a package. It's above the limits. I'm like, oh my. So the state came in with their clipboard. We had to call the pharmacy. They came in with additional shielding and they did all the documentation and they took the dose back. So that's why we wipe and survey our packages, because every once in a while mistakes happen. All right, UN 2910, like you said, it has to be a limited quantity, and we're going to talk about that on the next slide. Package it the same way you receive it. So all the foam and the pigs, everything has to be packaged the same way. I worked with a department one time, and what they would do is instead of packaging, they just threw everything in the box. And it's like, you have to put the pigs back together and you have to put them in the foam. And they never did that. They just threw it in the box like that. You can't do that. We have to do surveys and wipes, reverse the cards. All right, so this is a limited quantity table. If I only have technetium, what's the maximum amount of activity I can put in that package?
11 millicurie.
Yes, very good. All right, if I only have indium 111, what's the maximum amount I can have in the box?
8.1.
Okay, if I have tech and indium in a box, what's the total amount of radioactivity I can have in that box?
To anything divided by 2 for both of them.
Nope, you just find the smallest one. This is 8, so this is my limitation, the smallest one. So the total has to be less than 8.1. That's how you read limited quantity table. Yep. If you have a box that has, so in other words, if I had 9, let's see, if I had 6 millicuries of tech and I had 5 millicuries of indium 111, both are below the individual ones, but when I add it together, I have 11, and 11 is more than 8. Make sense? Okay. All right. We have some time. So what I'd like to do now is do some time distance and shielding calculations. So I am going to, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to bring up, do you have your calculator?
Yes.
Okay. I'm just going to make up some problems for us to do together. Okay. All right, so first we're going to do some time problems. So let's say a source is putting off 6 MR per hour. I want to know what's going to be my total exposure if I'm there for 30 minutes. How would you do this problem?
I just practiced.
All right, so let me show you a shortcut, okay? Anytime you have a time problem, the first thing you want to do is find your conversion. So in this case, this is actually a conversion. Your dose rate is a conversion. So 6 MR equals 1 hour. And then I'm going to start with what I'm given, which is my 30 minutes. Conversions are also doorways. So right now I'm at hours and I'm at minutes. So I have to convert my minutes to hours. 60 minutes in 1 hour. Minutes cancel. Now I'm at hours, so I can use my doorway. So whatever's on top goes on bottom. Put MR up here. Put my numbers in 6 and 1. And I'm left with MR. So then in my calculator, I'm going to take 30 times 6 divided by 60. And you should end up with 3 MR. All right, let me give you another problem, okay? And I want you to solve it the exact same way. I have a source that's putting off 1.4 MR per hour. I want to know how much I'm going to get in 15 minutes. Okay, so this is my conversion. 1.4 MR equals 1 hour. I'm going to start with 15 minutes. Whatever's on top goes on bottom. So first I'm going to convert from minutes to hours. Once I'm at hours, now hours goes on the bottom. I just put my numbers in. 1.4 MR per 1 hour.
Point 35.
0.35, yes. All right, let's do another one. These are so important. All right, you have a dose rate of 2 MR per hour. I want to know how long I can be there before I get 6 MR. So now I'm solving for time. This is still going to be my conversion. 2 MR equals 1 hour. I start with 6 MR. Now I'm going to put MR down here and hours up here. 2 MR in 1 hour. MR cancels. I'm left with hour.
3.
3, yes, very good. All right, we're getting faster. All right, let's do one more and then we'll move on. I have a dose rate of 3 millisieverts per hour. I want to know how long I can stand there before I get 25 millisieverts.
Point 6.
0.12. 3 divided by 25.12. All right, so time problems are all conversion problems. Step 1, find your conversion. Step 2, write what you start with. See if you're at your doorway. If you are, go ahead and put that in. If not, convert until you get to the doorway and then multiply and divide. All right, I'm going to send you some of these problems for you to work on, okay? All right, I want to move on to distance. Inverse square law. What's the equation for inverse square law?
I1 times D squared equal to I2 D squared.
Yes, very good. Okay, so let's say we have a source that's putting off 10 MR per hour at 3 centimeters, and we want to know the new exposure rate at 5 centimeters.
And 9. Oh, 3.6.
Yes, 3.6. Okay, you've got this. All right, one more, and then we're going to move on to shielding. Let's say we have a source that's putting off 8 MR per hour at 3 feet, and I want to know what distance that I need to move to in order to get 1.4 MR per hour.
Seven 1.7.
7.14?
7.17.
Yes, very good. Okay, now let's do some shielding. Let's say I have a source that's putting off 50 MR per hour, and I'm going to add 3 half value layers.
It's 200. Add 3 half
Add
value.
3 half value layers. So that's going to reduce it by
Reduce.
3 times.
6.25.
Yes, excellent. Okay, now let's make this a little bit harder. Now I have a source that's putting off 4.3 MR per hour. I'm going to add 1.2 millimeters of shielding, and 1 half value layer equals 0.3 millimeters.
Eight.
I got 0.27. Okay, so I'm going to do it the long way, and then I'm going to do it the short way. So I sub t equals 4.3 e to the negative 0.693 divided by the half value layer times the thickness.
Yeah, 0.27.
Okay. All right, I'm going to show you a little shortcut, okay? So when we did the problem, I don't remember exactly what it was, I think 20 MR per hour, and we added 3 half value layers, you divided it by 2 3 times, 2 to the third. We can do the same thing here, 4.3 MR per hour. I'm going to divide it by 2 to the number of half value layers. So if my shielding is 1.2 millimeters and each half value layer is 0.3, that means I'm adding 4 half value layers. So I can divide that by 2 to the fourth, and I'm going to get the exact same answer. All right, so this is just a little bit of a shortcut. All right, I'm going to send you some time, distance, and shielding problems. I think that you have a pretty good handle on it, but it's always good to have a little bit of practice. So I will do that. Do you have any questions for me?